certain social skills except in the face of adversity? What child will ever learn the skill of making an appeal, for example, unless and until the child is faced with situations that seem to them at the time untenable? I mean, if a child always gets his way growing up, always gets her way growing up, is that child going to graduate from high school and immediately become dictator of the United States? No. Which means for the rest of that kid's life, there will always be people who have authority over them. But if they reach the age of 18, getting whatever they want, they're not going to be equipped for adulthood at all. They won't know how to deal with anybody that doesn't have to do what they say. There are some guys that when a woman gets up in his face and starts ordering him around, they punch him. I'm not suggesting that they should. I'm just suggesting that there are more and more guys who just do that. I remember Pastor Johnston was telling me one time about a young woman in his church that she started keeping company with a guy that she thought was just wonderful. And Pastor Johnston says, you need to stay away from him. And she said, why? I just really like him. And he said, well, you need to do whatever you want. But you asked me and I told you, you need to stay away from him. And she came back to him a week later with a closed eye and a puffy lip. And she said to her pastor, he said that because he bought me dinner, he had a right to whatever he wanted. And I said, not with me, you don't. And he said, oh, yeah? And he proceeded to beat me up and take what he wanted. We just need to be careful how we raise kids so that they learn certain kinds of skills, they acquire certain kinds of wisdom. So from the time a child is born, that individual is very well served by parents who insist upon obedience and parents who are immune to the more obvious forms of manipulation. Over time, that child can be trained to become very skilled in the art of formulating appeals. And I think you ought to encourage that. I think you ought to be willing to reconsider a decision so that you can encourage your child to make an appeal to you. They'll start out, they'll be fumbling and make a mess of things, but they're trying and they're learning and they're developing skills, and you can encourage them along the way. They are learning to communicate instead of manipulate. They're learning to speak instead of screaming bloody murder. They're learning to ask rather than throw tantrums. And never, 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 ever should a child ever benefit from misconduct. A child should never benefit from misconduct. Because if a child is benefiting from misconduct, what have you just trained that child to do? Whatever it takes to get what I want. Not good. Not good. Not good. But if you can raise a child so that that child does not believe there is benefit from misconduct, you will help a child to make great strides toward becoming both humble and wise. And the social skills that can be imparted to a child who is not automatically given everything he or she wants, but who learns over time how to request from mom, how to request from dad, how to request from a teacher, how to request from a coach a new decision that serves the person in authority, as well as the child, so much better than the original decision that was made, if the child learns how to do that. Part of raising the child is raising with the understanding that the person in authority is not perfect. Sometimes they make decisions that are not the best. So instead of screaming, instead of yelling, instead of bulldozing, instead of throwing a temper tantrum, request a new decision. Do that with daddy, do that with mommy, do that with teacher. And parents, if your child has a teacher that won't listen when a child attempts something like that, there ought to be hell to pay for that. You ought to have it out with a teacher that will not allow your child to approach them in a respectful and courteous way to make a request. I don't want to listen to you. I'm tired of you. Nothing. Really? Really? Okay. Dad, you remember you told me how I should do this, 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 and this? Yeah. I tried that with Miss Jones today. And how did it go, honey? Well, I tried it yesterday too, and it didn't go good yesterday, and I thought maybe I did it wrong. So I tried again today, and I was really trying to be nice, Dad. And her words to me were basically, I don't want to hear anything coming out of your pie hole right now. I think that warrants a visit from Dad, don't you? Don't you, Mr. Barbosa? Would you expect a visit from a parent upon hearing of a teacher doing that? Sure. All the social skills that can be imparted to a child who is not automatically given everything he wants, but who learns over time how to make requests. Of course, parents need to be flexible about many things, but the things parents need to be flexible about are matters related to their child's maturity, related to their child's wisdom, related to their child's capacity to follow instructions. And in the beginning, when they're young and when they're small, their capacity to follow instructions is undeveloped, okay? But when it comes to matters of rebellion and stubbornness, the parents are obliged to be, what's a good word? Indefatigable. Not, in other words, they can't, where your kids can't wear you down. They just can't wear you down. Because you don't let it proceed that long. Oh no, you end it. Oh no, I told you, no. Knock it off. We're not going to discuss this anymore. And you don't let your kids string it out and make it become a long-term battle of the wills. You patiently insist that your child learn to implement the ingredients of an appeal. And there are so many other things to parenting, of course. But you're doing this so that your child will grow up to be influential without being manipulative. Influential without being a bully. And influential without being rebellious or sneaky. Some kids, if they don't get their way, they just sneak. Don't you hate a sneak? I think sneaks are disgusting. I think that children who sneak around and do things behind their parents' backs are basically human forms of cockroaches. I just think that's disgusting. I know too many pastors that are that way, that they grew up in churches where their pastor dad had very strong personal convictions and personal standards, and the kids went along with it all the while hating it, but they didn't have the gumption to stand up to Dad and say, Dad, I disagree. And so they waited until they got out of Bible college and got into the ministry, and then they became pastors, and they completely went against everything their dad ever taught them. Just gutless. Just sneaks. Just sneaks. So you say, okay, how does what you're saying, Pastor, fit into these three passages that we've looked at in Ephesians, Colossians, and Philippians? So go to Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. This is just one of many passages in the Bible that shows that basically when your children are living at home, the parents are in charge. Okay? And as soon as the child doesn't want the parents to be in charge, congratulations, you're now an adult and you're on your own. Wish you the best. See you at Thanksgiving. Okay. Colossians chapter 3, verses 20 and 21. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well and pleasing unto the Lord. Obey your parents in what things? In all things. For this is well pleasing unto the Lord. Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. Now, this is talking about being unreasonable. When a father is acting the way a father ought to do, sometimes his unreasonable kid's going to get mad, but that's not what this is talking about. We're not talking about a kid throwing a tantrum. We're not talking about a kid being stubborn or rebellious. We're talking about a child who is reasonable, and it's the father who is unreasonable, and sometimes dads can be. I know, I've been unreasonable at times with Sarah, I'm sure, but I can never remember when. Children can obey their parents when they are being positively trained instead of being uncoached and untutored. So many kids these days, their parents are not actually raising them. The parents are not hands-on. In other words, there's hours and hours and hours at a time. I remember we had a guy that used to go to church here who grew up on the East Coast. And I said to him one time, I said, you don't understand with your kids. He said, what do you mean? I said, this is not the same world you grew up in. What do you mean? I said, from the time you got up in the morning in the summertime until the time you came home at night, you were on the run, on your own, and your parents never knew where you were, right? He said, well, yeah, sure. Or actually, yeah, sure. I said, David, that's not the way it's supposed to be. I said, if God blesses, there will never be a time when my daughter is living in my home that I do not know where she is. And maybe once she is out of the home, I won't know where she is. But while she's in my house, I'm going to know where she is. Well, why would you want to do that? She's my daughter. It's the father who says and does nothing while the child misbehaves, who then explodes in a fit of anger when he's reached his limit. That's the guy who discourages the kid. You know, the kid will do something, and dad doesn't like it, but he doesn't say anything. And then the kid will do it again, even more so. The dad doesn't like it, but he won't say anything. And then the kid will escalate. The dad won't do anything, and the kid will escalate, and the dad won't do anything. And then the kid will really escalate, and the dad will explode. That's the kind of guy that provokes his children. Because when a mom or a dad get mad, what that shows is they waited way too long. You ought to deal with the problem way before you get mad. Because if you wait until you get mad, your kids know, well, the standard is when dad is mad. The standard is when mom is mad. No, the standard should be when the child does wrong, when the child disobeys, not when mom gets mad, certainly not when mom starts shrieking like a banshee. It should be when the child disobeys. So, the fathers, mothers lovingly and tenderly and patiently and repeatedly train children. That's what real parenting is all about. And what I would encourage you to do, make sure in your training, in your tender and patient and repeated training of your child, that you include in your training how your children should appeal to you to make a new decision. That you see, that's the. How many of you have hot water heaters in your house? That should be everybody, because nobody here is willing to take a cold shower. Okay. But what do you find at the top on the side of your hot water heater? You've got a pressure relief valve. And what that pressure relief valve is specifically for is to open up when the pressure inside your hot water heater gets too great, so that the hot water heater doesn't explode. Because hot water heaters can go off like rockets. Literally, they can go up through the roof dozens of feet up into the air. Just the bottom blows out and up they go. They can do that, okay? So the pressure relief valve has been judged to be appropriate by code officials, and guys like him make sure they're always there, as for safety purposes. What's the pressure relief valve with your kid? I believe your son or your daughter needs a pressure relief valve, and I believe you need to give them one. Okay? I believe husbands should have pressure relief valves with their wives. I gave my wife one the day we were married. I said, this is, if you get to the place where, do this. And in the 43 years that my wife and I have been married, she did that one time. And she did it to test me to see if it would work, and it worked. And so I wasn't on the spacecraft launch team. But I've been married for 43 years, so that's a good trait. But if you want to keep your kid from exploding, from going nuts, from going bonkers, your child needs to know there's a pressure relief valve. In other words, when I feel desperate, that I feel like I'm going to explode because I disagree with your decision, the pressure relief valve is the appeal. The child, that doesn't mean the child is going to get what he or she asked for. It's the process of you listening to the appeal and seriously considering, weighing, evaluating, deciding. That's the pressure relief. And I believe that that is a significant key to parenting. Does anybody have a question on what we've looked at this evening? Might seem